to be on the briefing. We are now 19 days from the midterm election. Man, this thing is coming up quick. Interesting guest today. I say that because there's a brand new poll out from the Associated Press that says that 50% of the electorate is concerned about the integrity of the vote. And our next guest here put out a documentary earlier this year called 2000 Mules. You may have heard about it. You probably have seen it. The author, the filmmaker, Dinesh D'Souza, has a now book that's been adapted from it that's going to be available on October 25th called 2000 Mules. It's basically a similar version of the movie, although it's actually got some interesting exchanges with reporters, and it's sort of it's not entirely similar. I enjoyed the book because I'd seen the movie, and anyway, it's a different take. But obviously, as you know, it's not like we sit around and just chat the whole time. I've always been intrigued by Dinesh's rise, how he came to be, and I wanted to talk to him, and the book gave a great opportunity to do that. I asked him a lot about how he came to be. He's published a ton of books, got into filmmaking, been tremendously successful, and actually he's had the most successful political documentary on the right, which is fascinating. So get into that with him as well. And then, really break down what's it like to be called a conspiracy theorist. That's what he has been, not, on his Wikipedia page, folks in the media, folks on the left. And you'll appreciate his answer. So I think you're going to really like this discussion because as we get closer and closer to an election and this issue becomes more and more prominent, here's a guy who has spent a ton of time really jumping into the issue of election fraud, of voting. And so without further ado, I bring you Dinesh D'Souza. Dinesh, welcome to the show. I want to get right into it. Obviously, a lot to get to with the book, but I want to start, and obviously the whole goal is to get people to know you. You grew up in India. You tell me a little bit why and how you came to the U.S., because I read a little bit about you were an exchange student in high school, and then you went to Dartmouth. I'm a New Englander, but considering where you are now, Dartmouth did not seem where I would have put you. So walk me through how you got to the U.S. and how you ended up at Dartmouth.
Well, I grew up a middle-class kid in India. My dad, an engineer, my mom, a housewife. And I was in high school in the 11th grade when a fellow from the Bombay Rotary Club came and spoke at our school and talked about the Rotary Youth Exchange Program. For a year in which you go to another country, America, England, Australia, Canada, and you live with 4 American families and you attend high school, the 12th grade. I mean, it was an extremely far out idea, but it intrigued me. I discussed it with my parents. I applied for, the scholarship, if you will, and I got it. And so it totally changed my life because I came to America really, I had never gone probably more than 50 miles away in a 50-mile radius of where I was born. So I had not traveled widely in India, let alone left the country. But I came to the United States. I lived in Arizona with 4 families, went to public school. And then my high school counselor came up to me one day and asked me if I had thought about applying to college. And he told me that if I was interested, he would kind of shepherd me through the process. That's how I ended up at Dartmouth. Remember, Sean, this was, I came as a freshman in 1979. So Reagan was in New Hampshire campaigning in 1979 for the presidency. And so we had a kind of close-up exposure to Reagan, the man, and of course, Reaganism. And so slowly, not immediately, but kind of by the end of my freshman year, I had caught the political bug.
So when you came, had any political or ideological bent or thoughts prior to coming to America? Was that something in India that your family had been, was that something that they discussed, or was it purely coming to America that you caught that bug?
Yeah, it was purely coming to America. I didn't think I had a political bone in my body. when a group of conservative renegades at Dartmouth founded this paper called the Dartmouth Review.
Yes.
A lot of my friends came up to me and said, "Don't join that newspaper. You're a liberal." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And what I realized was that I was echoing some, you may say, liberal opinions. But why? Not because I had thought about it. I was just carried by the tide. And of course, the current was in the liberal direction. So it wasn't until I began to sort of read and reflect on what I truly believed. So sometimes I say I didn't really convert or become a conservative. It's more that as I became exposed to conservative ideas, I realized, hey, that's what I've always believed.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I think we had a very similar collegiate experience then. After Dartmouth, you go on to work at the Policy Review and then the Reagan White House, which is pretty amazing to say. I think the thing that I think is interesting, obviously, we'll talk a little bit about your current book, but you published your first book at 30. And I published my first book at my late 40s, but it was after a stint at the White House. And I know what a challenge it was, but I also know like it's a lot easier now in the sense that there are more publishing houses. You if you have a social media presence or a celebrity about you, it's a lot easier because publishing houses can approach you. And I mean, point is, I think it's now a lot easier to publish a book than was back then. How do you get a publisher at 30 years old to pay attention to this immigrant that's here for what at that point not even 10 years, or maybe just over 10 years?
Yeah, I started writing articles at a very young age. In fact, I published a cover story in the National Review while I was at Dartmouth. And now we had sort of an in there because my professor, Jeffrey Hart, was a senior editor of National Review, a good friend of Bill Buckley's. But you're quite right. The system of publishing both articles and books was controlled from the top. It was an elitist type of system. You had to go through certain sort of gatekeepers. And so when I came to Washington to work for a magazine called Policy Review, I began to publish articles widely. And in fact, it was kind of funny because, of course, I have this Indian name, Dinesh, and a Portuguese last name, D'Souza. And my articles were like everywhere, Washington Post, New York Times. And people were like, who the heck is this Dinesh D'Souza character? And then I got a very good piece of advice from a friend of mine, Morton Kondracki, who was a Dartmouth grad, a liberal working for, at that time, the New Republic. And I had all these ideas for writing my first book. And Morton Kondracki really brought me down to earth. He goes, Dinesh, what subject are you the world's expert on? Are you the world's expert on missile defense? Well, don't write about that. Are you the world's expert on taxes? Don't write about that. I go, well, I'm the world's expert on what's happening at Dartmouth, on my own experience, because I just came out of there. So he goes, you know what? Write about that. I've been hearing all this crazy stuff about what's going on at Dartmouth. Let us know if that's happening around the country. So that was the germ of my first book, A Liberal Education.
I mean, so you go on and write 23 books. Is this like it's funny, when I left the White House, I had been approached several times about writing a book, and several sort of mentors and friends said, hey, just so you know, this is not easy. It takes up a lot of time, a lot of bandwidth. And they were right. And it's not something that comes natural to me. I've now gone on and done three, but each one of them is intense. Is this something? I mean, when you've written 23 books, is this something that you enjoy? Is it a passion project of yours? Is it? I mean, what drives you to write?
I mean, I noticed I liked words and language and English and writing from a very young age. But initially, I started doing articles. And I saw myself really more as a columnist, and I saw myself more as a short distance, you may say, sprinter. And I admired people like George Will, Pat Buchanan, people who I thought were very good at that kind of craft. But then I realized that that's actually a very dubious way to make a living, because I would spend time, I would write an article, send it into Washington Post, and then I'd receive a whopping check for like $125. And I realized that, wow, this is not an easy way to buy a car or pay the mortgage. So I realized that books are more enduring. They stick around longer because, of course, you get a newspaper, you throw it out. You get a magazine, you might keep it for a week. But few people either throw their books out, right? So I thought a book is more enduring. And also I realized that books, if you are able to write books and get people to buy them, it is actually a decent way to make a living. So I kind of went into becoming an author with somewhat practical thoughts in mind. And then I realized I'm actually good at this kind of marathon or long distance format because I like the idea of being able to, develop an idea, elaborate it, put a lot of evidence behind it, systematize it. And so I look at books as a kind of craft. And even though these days I earn a living by speaking, I make movies, I do a lot of different stuff. At the core, I think I retain that idea that I kind of at a young age decided to become an author.
Okay, so you've got that box checked. 23 books. I think you've established that you are really good at it. But in 2004, you kind of switch over from books to film. You make your first documentary. How did that transition happen?
Now, that was actually a little bit later, 2012. And the reason is that Obama was in the White House. And interestingly, I had written a book about Obama called The Roots of Obama's Rage, in which I had made a sort of wild argument at the time, today much more widely accepted. But at the time, I said, look, everybody's looking at Obama, even conservatives, as kind of a civil rights guy, a guy who sort of, first Black American president. So he's associated with, Martin Luther King and Selma and Montgomery and all the civil rights marches. And I said, you only have to look at Obama's life and read his own book called Dreams from My Father to realize that's not Obama's world at all. Obama's world is really outside of America. He's absorbed by his own admission, the dream from his father. So I wrote this book basically saying that Obama's ideology is anti-colonialism, the idea that America is a bad guy in the world. Western civilization has had a pernicious influence worldwide, an influence of conquest and rape and destruction of other peoples and so on. And so I said, if you watch Obama, he's going to try to take America down a notch to sort of rebalance the power in the world. And in any event, I put this all in a book. And then someone came up to me, a fellow that I knew, and he said, you got to get this to a wider audience. And I go, well, there's only so many people in America that buy hardcover books. And he goes, well, what about a movie? And then I remembered that, Michael Moore had made Fahrenheit 9/11 and dropped it in the middle of the 2004 campaign. And I was like, you know what? If that guy can do it, I can do it.
So yeah, I've always been told, and so obviously, 2,000 Mules, and we're going to get to this in a minute, but it sort of definitely seems to have broken the mold. But for a while, documentaries writ large, I was always told, not just political ones, documentaries overall were never seen, were never seen as money-making ventures. Is that still true? And is that true maybe in the political space?
I mean, I would say the only two guys who make money on documentaries are Michael Moore and me. And by that I mean that no, honestly, we've been able to create documentaries that some do better than others. I mean, Fahrenheit 9/11 is the most successful political documentary of all time. But then my film on Obama is number 2, and 2,000 Mules is probably 3 or 4. The problem is the rules have changed these days in the kind of post-COVID environment. It's hard to release movies in a big way in the theater anymore. So there's more, the format of releasing movies has shifted now to digital downloads and streaming and so on. But no, I would say that by and large, if you set a high bar, let's just say people who have made movies and earned $50 million or more, that population is very small. And basically it's down to Michael Moore and Dinesh.
So, because in 2016, you did that movie, Obama's America, that broke all sorts of records. It's the highest grossing conservative film. What I just don't get, like, what is the Dinesh secret sauce? Like, what is it? Is it the content? Because it's hard. It's to your point. This is a hard market to break into it. So what was it that you did? Was it your marketing? Was it the content of it? I can't because I get it. I've seen just on the book front the suppression that exists from the mainstream media and so much of corporate America. How did you break that mold?
Now, the suppression was less when I got started. In fact, I remember meetings at Lionsgate where you'd have conservatives and Lionsgate come up to me, we love your films, Dinesh. I had a premiere in Los Angeles for my second film called America, Imagine a World Without Her. All the top brass at Lionsgate were at the premiere. They're like, Dinesh, you got to go into feature films. You're a really good filmmaker. I mean, this would never happen today. Hollywood has become far more ideological now than it
Right.
was even 10 years ago. All right, so that's one thing to say. I think the key is this. People are often coming up to me with movie ideas. Dinesh, make a movie on Obamacare. Dinesh, make a movie about the border. And very often conservatives think about movies as a form of messaging. They think of it as a form of getting our message out. And we have to remember that very few people go to see a movie for that purpose. By and large, people go to see movies for entertainment. And Michael Moore, dumb as he is, and the intellectual level of his movies is just, I mean, it's a null set. You know, this guy has no idea. But what he does know, the one thing he knows, and it's the most important thing to know, is that movies have to be entertaining. And so he'll do all kinds of stunts. Remember when he went to like Charlton Heston's home and was shouting outside his bedroom at night and so on? That's a stunt, but it's intriguing. If you're watching it, it's fascinating. Is Charlton Heston going to come out? Is he and Michael Moore going to get into a fight? So crazy as it is, Michael Moore understands that movies are an entertainment medium. And I understand that too. So I'm always careful to make films that, yes, they have information, yes, they have messaging, but fundamentally they're enjoyable to watch, they're inspiring to go to. People stand up and cheer at the end. You need to know that if you're gonna make a documentary film.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I watched 2000 Mules. It entertains. I was like kind of, it the cinematography is interesting, the characters are interesting, that you introduce, and so I get it. I think that's a really interesting point. I didn't think about it from that standpoint until you just said it, and I want to talk about this because I want to talk about. It's interesting that we're having this conversation. Right now, there are two interesting things out that are happening this week. One, the DC City Council gave non-citizens the right to vote. Two, there's a brand new poll out in the last 24 hours from the Associated Press that's 50% of the American people do not have high confidence the votes in the upcoming midterm election, and I'm going to quote this, will be counted accurately. That's the AP, not me. And that's what brings me to what your current project is right now. So you've taken the documentary 2000 Mules and you've adapted it to a book, 2000 Mules. It comes out October 25th, obviously available for pre-order now. I have been kindly provided by a copy of it. I've read through the book, and it's kind of cool. For those of you who don't, I know in some places in the book you say, you talk about how like I could lay this out in the movie, but there's some cool pictures from in the middle of the book that show some of the ballot stuff and the latex gloves and everything. So even if you haven't seen the movie, there's a lot of pictures that show a lot of the things here. And anyway, I will tell you, if you have, when you buy the book, what I love, and I've said this about some of the other books that authors that I've had on, like there's an exchange that you have with Philip Bumpin here, who is a left-wing reporter for the Washington Post. And I'll leave it to readers to see for themselves, but you sort of destroy him because he sort of was like, show me this. And you're like, he says, well, it's not in the movie. And you're like, well, not everything can go into a movie. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But I want to start the conversation with this because I after I left the White House, and I'm probably still in it. I stopped looking at my Wikipedia page because I couldn't. It just was like nuts. I mean, there was A, misinformation. B, it was just I realized it's a bunch of leftists that write this stuff. But I will admit that I can't even look at my own. But the thing that I thought was interesting when I looked at yours is it says, this is how it describes you: commentator, author, filmmaker, and conspiracy theorist. Okay. And I thought to myself, this is what was interesting after having read your book and watched your movie. In both cases, what I took away from this is you ask a series of questions. You show us things. I looked at this as, and I was like, okay, I don't know that that's a conspiracy theorist as much as somebody saying, watch what I have found and let me show it to you. Okay. And so I guess I want to ask you first and foremost, what do you think about that label? Because I watched the movie because and all the hype, and then I looked through the book, and again, it's like, okay, here's what happened. Here's this person stuffing this into a Dropbox. Here is the latex glove. Here's a picture of it. You tell me what you think. I mean, this isn't Dinesh D'Souza saying to you, so this must be whatever. It's You're basically saying, it's almost like a lawyer saying, here's the evidence.
Yeah, I mean, I've never advanced a quote conspiracy theory in my life. When I talked about Obama, when I was making the Obama film, I found out that Obama had read his own book, Dreams from My Father, in audiobooks. And so if you watch my movie 2016, when I say something about Obama, it's interspliced with Obama speaking in his own voice and confirming that point, telling his own story, and you can tell it's Obama. It's nobody else. So where's the conspiracy? I'm quoting the guy. Fast forward to 2000 Mules, I was reluctant to make the movie because I said to myself, look, it's one thing to talk about anomalies. It's another thing to talk about what happened to the suitcase, under the desk in Georgia, or here's a dead guy who voted, or I've got affidavits. And I go, look, none of this amounts to proof. And by proof, I mean evidence that is substantial enough to raise a question of whether the election as a whole would have come out differently. This is what courts call the but-for standard. But for this alleged fraud, would it have changed the outcome of the election? So it wasn't until I really sat down for a full day, my wife Debbie and I, with Catherine Engelbrecht and Greg Phillips, and we went through this evidence, both the cell phone evidence, geo-tracking, but also the video evidence. And the strongest point that struck me was that the two support each other. So let me give you an example of what I mean. Let's say, for example, you and I are on a jury, and we're trying to decide if somebody who is accused of being a serial killer actually did it. And let's say that he went to 10 different homes in a single night, and you have 10 different bodies in those homes. 10 different people were killed. And from his cell phone, you know for sure that this guy was at those homes. But as it turns out, in one of those homes, let's say home number 5, in only one, there was a video camera. There was actually video surveillance. Now, you can tell from his cell phone that he got to that home on, let's say, Tuesday night at 1 a.m. in the morning. So you go look on the video camera at that exact date and that exact time, and boom, there he is, entering the home. So what I would then say is, wow, not only do we have technological evidence, which is the cell phone geo-tracking, and by the way, our cell phones have an ID in them, a kind of, call it a digital fingerprint. So your phone is there. I mean, I could give my phone to my wife. Maybe she went to the Dropbox, but that my cell phone is at that Dropbox is beyond a reasonable doubt. And then second, you have the video evidence. So when the two corroborate each other, you have a very powerful case. So what I did, and I think if you watch 2000 Mules, in a very restrained way, just present all this evidence, put it before the viewer and say, listen. So then the left comes screaming, Dinesh, how can we believe you? You're a felon. And I'm like, wait a minute. The evidence is all in front of your eyes. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to believe your own eyes. And so it's remarkable to see the way.
So let me ask you this, and that's what I want to ask you. Okay, so there's two possible responses. That's ridiculous. That's not what that guy is. You made that up, or I don't. But like, in other words, I watched this, and in the book, like I said, you've got pictures in it of there's like screenshots or whatever from the movie as well. So if you want to see, kind of, if you're reading and you want to see it, like, okay, watching, because there's the exchange you have with Philip Bump in the book. As I said, it's funny because he's basically saying, hey, lots of people take selfies when they vote, because the point that you're making, and again, please, if I'm screwing this up, let me know. But basically, the point that you're making is these mules would take these votes, stuff them, collect them all, stuff them into a ballot box, right? And so they're putting on latex gloves because they don't want to leave fingerprints. But then they would take a picture to prove that they did this. And one of the points that, like, Bump is saying, oh, well, people take selfies all the time of themselves voting. Okay, I've done that myself because I want to post, hey, guess what? I voted. I don't put a picture of myself with latex gloves in multiple ballots, though, stuffing them into a thing. And these people are taking their faces out of it. So to your point, it's you can't. What is the possible explanation? And that's what I want to add. Like, what is the response? Like, I don't get it. If somebody says to you, like, tell me what is the explanation for taking a handful, 10, 15, 20, who cares, five, and jamming them into a ballot box. What is the explanation? Because it's either illegal, which it is in almost every state, to do that, right? Or it's made up. But it has to be one of the two, right? And that's what I want. Like, what does when you show that to somebody and say, "Don't believe Dinesh, believe this picture"? What do they say in response to that?
Well, to yeah, so to address the Philip Bump point for just a moment, there's not a single image, there's not a single video, there's not a single picture in the movie or in my book where a mule, a person delivering these votes, is taking a picture of themselves. In every case, they are taking a picture of the ballot box and the ballots going in the box. So right there, you can see that what Philip Bump is saying is nonsense. No one
Right.
is taking selfies. They're taking photos of hey, I did the job. Here are the ballots going in the box. That is the only reasonable explanation of what they're doing. Now, with regard to wearing gloves, again, initially, some of the fact checkers, I'm thinking of some people like the fact checker at AP, this is Ali Swenson. They go, well, it was really cold in Georgia during the runoffs in January, and
Honey, wear the latex gloves. It's
you're
cold
right.
outside.
They're not wearing
No,
leather gloves or
not the
woolen
mittens,
gloves.
not the mittens, the latex gloves.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is no one who sees the movie can believe this kind of nonsense. So here's the point. If you accept the factual premise of the movie that you've got these mules, they've got backpacks full of ballots, and they went to 10 or more drop boxes. Now, again, let me pause to point out, we're not talking about the US mailbox. So you can't say on Monday I went to mail my mortgage, and on Tuesday I paid my electric bill, and on Wednesday I wrote my mom. No, these are ballot drop boxes, and they exist only to put ballots in them. So what innocent explanation is there for the same guy on either one day or multiple days going to 10 or more mail-in drop boxes as identified by their phone? They didn't go by the drop box, they went to the drop box, typically from their car to the drop box and back to their car and on to the next drop box. What is the innocent explanation for that? There isn't any.
Oh, yeah, but also not to mention, and I know some states have changed their laws, but in most states it's called ballot harvesting. It's actually illegal to do that. So the question is, you could say in one case maybe I went and did this, but why are you going to a ballot box multiple times? And with photographic evidence of you dropping it in there again, it defies logic. There's no explanation, and that's what I just don't get. Is that I sort of want to hear somebody on the left say, "Tell me what that possibly is." I want to ask you one last question, and because I know your time is tight, and you address this a little bit in the beginning of the book. I I think that there's two separate issues, and then one separate outcome that didn't work. In other words, there are after the election that there are distinctions between the stuff that you're bringing up and the way that Democrats changed the law. And I'm thinking of Nevada, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, where they allowed ballots to come in, legally cast ballots to be cast that weren't in accordance with the law. That to me is equally reprehensible, where you're basically saying an unelected board, somebody who isn't allowed constitutionally or according to the state law, to say we're going to allow ballots to receive, say, 5, 6, 7 days after an election, or we're not going to allow that. You don't need a signature match or whatever. But they basically, without changing the law, just willy nilly allow that to happen. That is equally reprehensible because changing the rules as those states did, or Wisconsin allowing invalids, and I know you cover this in the book as well, talking about how there's 95, 100% participation rate in these homes where people who are declared to be, incapacitated in some way, mentally or otherwise, were suddenly voting at 100%. It just doesn't make sense. And people were in your book, you document how they go back and they prove that this person has never voted. They don't have the mental capacity to currently communicate in any way. There's no way they could have. I think that Wisconsin allowing some of this stuff to happen was reprehensible. Then there's a difference between the votes. But I also think the Trump campaign in particular, didn't do a good job after the fact, and his own people and lawyers let him down big time.
Well, yes, you said a lot, and I think you're quite right. First of all, you made an important distinction between You can call it Democrats using COVID to unlevel the playing field, to give themselves a kind of structural advantage. And look at all the Zuckerberg money, the mail-in drop boxes, very often concentrated in heavily urban Democratic areas. The fact that in Pennsylvania, for example, they were accepting valid votes even after election day, and that is flatly forbidden by the law in Pennsylvania. So these are all the ways in which you may say that they unlevel the playing field. That's completely different from what we show in 2000 Mules. Now, it enabled what we show in 2000 Mules, but what we're getting at in 2000 Mules is a coordinated system of these delivery men called mules. We got the name kind of from human trafficking or drug trafficking. The mule is a delivery man who collects all these fraudulent votes from one place, takes them to these drop boxes, goes on a kind of mailman route, and drops these votes off in different drop boxes. A whole different issue that's not covered in the movie or in the book is the issue of the machines. Now, I know that the CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Group, has admitted that these machines can be vulnerable, but they deny that the machines were in fact used to cheat. We basically don't touch that issue. We focus on the type of fraud that we think we can document. And as it turns out, it is a very startling type of fraud, because to believe it, you don't have to rely on affidavits. I'm not Sidney Powell saying I've got 150 affidavits. The problem with that is, of course, people go, well, who are those people? How do we know they're not lying? Well, the beauty of 2000 Mules is it shows you actual official surveillance video taken by these states themselves, and there's not a single person in the country that's questioned the authenticity of that video.
Right. No, no. Dinesh, like I said, the book 2000 Mules is available for pre-order on Amazon. We wrap up the podcast with a quick rapid fire lightning round. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right. When you travel, are you the kind of guy who arrives early or just in time?
Early.
How low can you let your phone battery go?
Well, probably not too low, maybe 25%.
That's slower than I can go. Uh, if How many unread emails do you currently have?
Thousands.
Thousands doesn't. I have 48,000. Let me hold on. I'll update you right now. 49,430 right now. So thousands doesn't really do it for me. Do you give me a range? Are we talking plus or minus? Uh,
Well, it's a big. The reason it's a big number is my emails come through different places. They go through the movies. They go through my website. My wife opens my email. So in other words, I don't even see all my emails. I try to scroll through my emails. I read the emails from the people I know.
okay. If you had 48 hours to binge a show, what would it be?
Um, Gosh, you mean something that's like regularly on
Yeah,
TV?
anything, anything. You have 48 hours. You want to binge something.
Well, to be honest, if I had 48 hours, I would go back and watch Ken Burns' original series on the Civil War that I saw about 20 years ago, but I've never had the time to see since.
Fair enough. How clean do you keep your house?
Very.
What's your least favorite chore?
What's my least favorite what?
Chore.
Oh, chore.
Yeah.
Taking out the trash.
Oh, come on. I don't mind that.
I mean, I don't mind it, but
I mean, that to me, I'll take that trash every day as long as I don't have to do laundry. If you could have a drink with anyone, living or dead, who would it be?
Richard Nixon.
Who is the coolest celebrity you've ever met?
Well, I won't say he's cool, but it was very intriguing for me to meet him at the World Economic Forum many years ago. I met Yasser Arafat.
That worked. Biggest pet peeve?
My biggest pet peeve is that Republican. My biggest pet peeve is Republicans who still think we're living in Reagan's America.
Okay. Something you won't go cheap on?
My wife.
Ooh, smart answer. We've had, I don't know how many guests we've had on this podcast. That is the best answer I have ever gotten, and I may steal it. Holy smoke. All right, last one. I did a reality TV stint on Dancing with the Stars. If you had to go on a reality TV show, anyone, what would you go on?
Oh wow, that's a good one. I don't know these shows all that well, but
How
let me
about what type?
it certainly would be nothing where I'm asked to sing. Actually, Debbie, my wife, is a singer, so I'd put her on. Maybe a ventriloquist for me, because I wouldn't be able to endure it.
Okay. The last quick thing we do is a little pronunciation. Have fun. So there's five things. Ready? Data or data?
Data,
Gala or gala?
gala,
Iran or Iran?
Iran,
Caramel or caramel?
caram. I actually use both. Maybe caramel.
Okay. And the last one is aunt or aunt?
Well, I grew up in kind of British India, so I was raised with aunt, but today I would say aunt.
I got to tell you, I think you guys know this. For if you are a longtime listener, I always love the rapid fire and the answer that he gave to that answer at the end about his wife. Best one yet. Best one yet. I may have to steal it, but I really did enjoy the discussion with Dinesh. It's fascinating when you there's a perception of somebody out there, and I'm not saying I had this, but I mean, in terms of what the media creates of somebody, I love the ability that we've had through this podcast to sit down and discuss with somebody, not just their trajectory, how they got to where they are, um, and delve into that, which we've done with so many people, but also to face head first the image that people have of them, and to sort of go beneath the surface. And um, and I, I was really intrigued to hear Dinesh take on the allegations, and the smears and the that have come out against him. So I, I enjoy these conversations so much. I hope you do too as well. We are now, as I mentioned, in the final 3 weeks. Now, well beneath it, 19 days. So Monday we're going to continue to break stuff down. So much to get to. We've been talking about every night on the show. But the president's tapping the strategic oil reserve, which is clearly a play. They have really pumped as much as they can out of this abortion issue, and it's not going well. Inflation, uh, the economy, crime are all continuing to be huge issues. So uh, it's going to be interesting. We're watching more and more races come into focus on the Republican side. They are finding these Biden plus 11, Biden plus 13, Biden plus 15 congressional districts that they are playing in, because the Democrats have just gotten themselves deeper and deeper in hot water. We'll probably talk a little bit about that as we get closer and closer to the election. So I look forward to seeing you back on Monday. I hope you have a great weekend, and I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Take care.